Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for hopping on with us. My name is Sarah Lewis. I'm the Director of Business Development over here at Dash & Thompson. We're so excited to present to you today as part of our Best Practice Series webinars. I just wanted to pass on a couple of housekeeping items before we get started here. Throughout the whole presentation, your personal phone lines will be on mute, but if you have any questions, please submit them through the chat panel function on the right-hand side of your screen from the webinar. We will leave time for answering some questions at the end of the presentation today, and we'll also do our best to get back to you individually if we happen to miss any at the end of the presentation. And then also throughout the presentation today, there will be a series of interactive polls. Please respond accordingly just by clicking the best suitable answer on the screen, and then we'll use that as part of the discussion today. So with that, I'll hand it off to Jolene Rowan.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jolene Rowan, as Sarah said, and I'm the Chief Learning Officer and EVP of Client Services here at Dash & Thompson. And I'm delighted to be here to talk to you today about a very popular topic, that is subject matter experts. And I have to say that I remember my first subject matter expert experience vividly, even though it happened over 30 years ago, which to me is a testament to how powerful these relationships are for those of us in L&D. So back at that time, I was working for a local financial institution here as a classroom trainer. And then about a year into the job, I was assigned a project to develop training for a new software tool. And up to that point, I had only delivered training, not developed it. And again, I remember to this day venturing down to IT on the second floor and looking through a sea of low cubes and spotting Steve. He was my SME. As I approached Steve, I could tell that this was going to be a little uncomfortable. Either he had forgotten we were meeting, or he wasn't prepared, or he didn't want to meet. I wasn't really sure. But I walked up to his desk, I introduced myself and sat down beside him. And he immediately started pointing to the fields on one of his many screens. And if you all are as old as I am, you remember the green screens back in the day. And as he was pointing at his screen, he was describing each field in detail. And that's how the meeting went. I had an agenda for that meeting, but it certainly wasn't that. But eventually, despite our kind of common cluelessness, we were able to get done what we needed to get done for the project, but it wasn't without many lessons learned. Which brings me to today, sharing with you lessons that I and others have learned along the way, and for me, since working with my first SME. So on our agenda today is to talk about some archetypes of subject matter experts. And we're going to talk about the characteristics of these experts and ideally how to work well with them. We're going to have some interactive polls, and we're going to talk about some tips and tools for working well with subject matter experts. And at the end, we're going to open it up for some questions like Sarah explained. So the bottom line is we need subject matter experts in order to do our jobs successfully. They're experts in what we do, or in what they do, and not necessarily in what we do in terms of learning and development professionals. But we have to recognize their expertise, and like I said, we need that expertise in order to do our jobs successfully. Some SMEs, we find, are pros at helping us, and they have experience working on training projects, but some are naturally wired to devote time and attention that we need, but some are very new to learning and development projects and need us to really kind of anticipate their needs along the way and help every step of the way. But in any case, what we found is that SMEs really need our help to perform their best, and we need them to perform our best. And to that end, Dash has done some reflection on these lessons learned over the years and has defined 7 SME archetypes that help us navigate these relationships. And we found that the SME characteristics generally fall into 7 archetypes or personas that you see on this screen. Control freak, include it all, SME, unfocused me, Clueless Me, which was my SME back in the day, but I have to say I was also clueless. AWOL SMEs, Unreliable SMEs, and Busy Bee Smes. And we need to keep in mind that while SMEs might primarily fall into one of these personas or archetypes, their behaviors may span across these, and sometimes they may change from a control freak to an unfocused SME during the span of a single meeting. The point is, we use these archetypes as general guidelines that help us identify or name behaviors, help us understand what we're seeing and adjust our approach accordingly. And then blending these archetypes and this understanding with empathy and gratitude really results in successful relationships. And I can't emphasize empathy and gratitude enough. So let's take a minute and take a look at each of these archetypes in a little bit of detail. We're going to start with the clueless me. May seem confused or dismayed by their assignment to your project, and even when assigned, they might not know exactly what they're supposed to do. And this may be because they've not been adequately briefed on the project or their role on the project. What they really need from us is reinforcement of their role and why it's so important that we get their expertise. They really need to be drawn in. So that's the clueless me. We're going to move on to the control freaks me. And again, at this point, we're just starting to learn a little bit about the characteristics. And soon we're going to talk about tips and tricks for working with these folks. The control freak really seems to have some overconfidence in their abilities, not only in their areas of expertise, but also in ours. So designing and dictating every aspect of a course is something that you might see. They're just in our business. And while that might be frustrating and we might get defensive, the point here is that the control freak generally has a vision. And they may not have been asked to share that vision yet, or they might not have been heard or understood. And so what they really need is our help in allowing them to articulate their vision. And whether that vision is on point or not, we need to know it, right? That's a data point for us that we may need to manage. And of course, they need to be heard to be cooperative. So we need to avoid being defensive. We may use a parking lot for their ideas and revisit later when maybe we're not feeling defensive. Okay, so that's the control freaks me. Next are characteristics that we have aligned with what we call a busy bee Sme. This is the person who is the go-to person in a department or area for everything. They're generally enthusiastic and excited to help, but they are constantly in meetings and troubleshooting other problems. They kind of have a revolving door, and hard to find them when you need them most. And the key here really is to dig deep to understand their schedule and how to best work within that schedule and have ultra-focused meetings. Okay. The unfocused SME is, the included all SME, I'm ahead of myself. This is one of the most common SMEs that I've encountered in my journey as an instructional designer, and perhaps one of the most difficult. They're insistent that every detail about a process or procedure, no matter how small, has to be included. We'll find this particularly when we're talking with folks in compliance. And we know that it's all critical information as instructional designers, and we need to reassure them that their expertise is critical and the information is critical, but we have to share with them and do a little bit of knowledge transfer about what we know in terms of learning theory and cognitive overload, and how action-based learning is more meaningful and relevant and sticky than an information dump. Then we have the Unfocused Me. Similar to some of the other characteristics that we talked about, but the Unfocused Me is someone who might be sitting in your meeting and not really following the agenda for a number of reasons. Maybe they're multitasking and they come back into the conversation and they're off topic, or we have to repeat what we've been talking about. These folks need, process overviews and reminders early and often, and they probably need some job aids for meeting etiquette and completing their projects. The Unreliable SME is the SME that is definitely smart and capable like the others, but often really has difficulty with time management and meeting deadlines. They're often providing some creative excuses for their incomplete or missing assignments. And I like to kind of focus here on the creative, because sometimes I think we forget that while our SMEs are subject matter experts, often in the technical details, they might have a creative side. And that creative side might be just, wanting to come out. And therefore, we might want to include these folks in creative brainstorming to tap into their creative side, or for sure include them in project planning so they get their input and buy-in on the schedule. And then the final and seventh SME archetype that we've defined is the AWOL SME. That SME that is certainly overscheduled, overworked, and overwhelmed like the rest of our SME, but they're double, triple, and triple booked. They might travel for business, and they just simply have deprioritized their work on this project, and they're not communicating about it, and just basically absent. Certainly, these SMEs need a lot of communication about the risk and consequences of missing deadlines in terms of scope creep and budget creep. And they also need to understand the consequences of providing input too late in a project and what that might do in terms of rework and going over budget. They certainly need us to be prepared and reliable, even though perhaps they're not. All right, so that is a quick rundown of the 7 SME archetypes or personas and some key characteristics of each, and a little bit about what they might need from us. So I'm going to ask Sarah to join me right now, and we are going to do a couple of role plays and have you answer a poll at the end of each role play to identify what SME we're dealing with here. All right, so Sarah and I are going to get ready. I'm going to work as the ID, and Sarah is going to be my SME. So Sarah.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for agreeing to meet with me today.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that you got the agenda that I sent.
Did you see the sunshine this morning?
Oh.
Can you believe that?
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, finally we've got some nice weather here in Minnesota. So, my question, did you get the agenda that I sent you today?
Yeah, I got it right here. Yeah, awesome.
Yep. All right. So at the top, what I was
really hoping we could start with, though, is the design aesthetic. Like, what colors are you thinking that we're going to use here?
Yeah, well, before we can focus on that, I really want to
It just really reminded me of this time that I used to work in advertising, and the colors are just so important.
They are important, and I completely agree. And I'm going to just put that on the parking lot over here, but would you mind if we just kind of started at the top of our agenda?
Okay.
Awesome.
Great. And then for the actual content that we're putting in, what do you think we should start with?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Sarah. Okay. All right. So to those of you on the line, the poll is open, and please vote on which SME you think Sarah was portraying. Awesome. And Sarah is sharing those poll results, I believe, or? Okay. Awesome. So we have about 20% of you thinking she's the control freak, and about 76% of you believing she's the unfocused type, and some are thinking clueless, and some are thinking include it all. And what we queued her up to be was the unfocused me, and she did a brilliant job. But I think because of our results, we can see that sometimes these characteristics can bleed over into multiple types. But in this situation where the issue is she's truly unfocused, we need to be ready with some interventions that get her back on focus. Great. So thank you for that. We're going to do another one. All right. So again, I'm going to be the instructional designer, and I'm going to be trying to collect some content for Sarah, and Sarah is my subject matter expert. So, hi, Sarah.
Hi.
I'm Jolene. We met over email, and thank you for agreeing to meet with me today. We have some very important business to do, and quickly, because this project has to launch soon. So I would like to start by just kind of outlining what we want to cover in this training.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad we're meeting today. I've actually already prepared several binders of information for you, and I put it all together, and I have the associated images that I want, and the whole, our standard operating procedures, everything's in here, and then there's a couple of links to some other performance support materials.
That's awesome, and so I'm going to use all of that as content input, and I'm going to create some training around that, because what we like to do is structured training around activities, which means we might not include all of the information. Instead, we might refer people to their standard operating procedures to get some of that.
I just think it's so critical that we have all of this in there, because it's just the most important information.
Okay. All right. So we're going to open up the poll. Guess who Sarah was? Awesome. Okay. So we had 75% choose include it all, and about 25% choose control freak. And you're right on. She was playing the include it all SME, but that really blends with what we know about control freaks. But again, if it's an include it all, the intervention might be a little bit different in terms of how we approach that versus someone who's just really, motivated to control versus include all of the content. So thank you so much for participating in those polls. 2 more polls, just because I want to understand from the audience who you encounter most of the time. And so our first poll is, which SME archetype do you encounter most? All right. Again, thank you. Looks like, and you know, I find this to be really common across audiences that we talk to, but about 31%, kind of the highest percentage on that control freak and include it all. Next, the unreliable or AWOL. Then Busy Bee, Unfocused, and Clueless. And like I said, that's a very common finding. And then just because I want to see if anything changes if we ask the question differently, which SME archetypes do you encounter less often? Okay. Great, thank you. Sarah's sharing those results. So really least often is Clueless Me, followed by, you know, close ties or close responses for Unreliable, Unfocused, and Busy Bee. So again, thank you. That will just help inform where we focus the rest of the webinar. So we're going to go into part two. Part one, we talked about who our SMEs are, what the characteristics are, who we encounter most often. Now we're going to talk about how to work with SMEs. And there are some basic building blocks that I want to start with. And the first of these building blocks are fairly obvious. We need to build rapport and we need to establish points of connection. And in this, we're really conveying our interest in them as people and demonstrating that we listen and care. And I have an example that I'd like to share. Several years ago, I was managing a project and I had several instructional designers working on the project with a variety of SMEs. And one of my instructional designers was having a lot of difficulty getting her SME to open up and share. And in having conversations with him, she learned that he loved bacon. And our client was in Pennsylvania, and we would travel to meet with them from time to time. But being from Minnesota and the Midwest, this idea of bacon resonated with her, and she sent him some chocolate-covered bacon. And that was the tipping point for their relationship. It had nothing to do with the project and everything to do with her demonstrating that she was listening to this person intently and that she cared. So this is really an important building block for working with our SMEs. The next is clarifying roles and responsibilities. And this is about roles related to timeline and budget and expectation of which tasks are done by who. The key here is that we want to clarify early and often and really make our SMEs' jobs as easy as possible. So we should take on roles where we're managing, and our goal is always to make our SMEs look good to their team. So keep that tidbit in mind. The next building block is ensuring that everyone understands the protocols and procedures. And because we are learning and development professionals, we know that you can't, this conversation is not one and done. We'll communicate protocols and procedures as we're kicking off, but especially for unfocused SMEs and unreliable SMEs, we have to remember to remind them. As the saying goes, we need to tell, somebody 7 times in order for it to stick. It's especially critical with our SMEs who are busy and may exhibit some of the characteristics that we talked about. And then the last building block is to clarify expectations, and that really is a lot about listening to SMEs, understanding what their vision is and what their roadblocks are, and then clarifying and adjusting from there. Okay. So keeping those building blocks in mind then, and our SME archetypes, let's look at some tools to help us do these things, to build these relationships. And the first, and perhaps the most important, is kicking off for success. And the key here is to follow a robust kickoff agenda. And this, what you see on the screen right now is a high-level outline of an agenda that we use when we kick off projects with clients. And as Sarah mentioned earlier, we're going to have a download at the end of today, and it will be a white paper around kicking off for success. But generally speaking, you want to cover the project goals and scope, the methods and processes, have some brainstorming around creative direction, walk through the content. We want to do a project pre-mortem, and I'll talk more about that, and then we want to wrap up for success so that everybody hits the ground running. I've highlighted 2 things in this agenda that I want to call your attention to specifically, and the first is under project goals and scope discussion. We found that it is extremely important to walk through the statement of work. A few people work hard early on, even before a statement of work is signed, to create that statement of work, but they are the only ones who typically see that. We find if we bring the statement of work into the kickoff agenda, that is a huge component of getting alignment almost immediately. Okay. And then the next thing that I want to call your attention to is the project pre-mortem. And it's really asking what success looks like and hearing from everyone that's in the kickoff. And I guess what I'd also like to point out is that in planning for your kickoff, you want to be sure to invite everyone who has a role or a responsibility in the project so that everyone is aligned from the get-go. And this is where it is particularly important to get your AWOL SMEs, if you can identify them ahead of time, and your Controlfreak SMEs, because you want them to understand what's going to happen if you don't get from them what you need, particularly that AWOL SME. But you also want to give the Controlfreak an opportunity to define what success looks like and really listen. So that project pre-mortem, it's like having a post-mortem during your kickoff meeting, where you ask the subject matter experts and the project sponsor, reviewers, to imagine that we've completed the project, that the training has been delivered as intended, learners have taken the training, and think about what you want to be hearing. What does success look like? That's the conversation that we have in the kickoff agenda. All right. talked about in the kickoff agenda that we're going to walk through processes, and we will also want to walk through the process and provide reminders every step of the way. So during our kickoff meetings, we lay out step by step what the process is, what we can expect at every stage, and what the SMEs' responsibilities are and what the instructional designer's responsibility are. We provide really a bird's eye view then of the key dates for the instructional designers and the SMEs along that timeline. We can use this time then to also ask, do you foresee or are there any dates or areas in this milestone that are going to be problematic? So again, at the kickoff, we're really providing details on what this project is going to look like. Then throughout the project, we're going to give the subject matter experts some job aids. One might be a milestone tracker. So in this example, we have a spreadsheet created that has one row for each deliverable that shows who the subject matter expert is, who the instructional designer is, and then we've laid out all the specific dates along the way with key turnaround times for all of these milestones, so that again, we can go directly to our calendars, or the SMEs can go directly to their calendars and mark off the times that they will need to be providing content or reviewing content. So again, we're giving SMEs some job aids. Another type of job aid might be a cheat sheet for reviewing deliverables. So again, as you send a deliverable, maybe it's in a storyboard state or an alpha state or a beta state, you're sending along the instructions. In this example, what to review at alpha, okay? And what the expectation there is in the bottom, after we complete the alpha cycle. Second page shows how do you provide your input and then, or your feedback comments, and then what's going to happen next. So again, we're giving this SME job aids for, helping them understand how to do their job along the way. And another point I want to make here is that we can't expect them to remember all of this, from the kickoff meeting. Okay. And the other really effective, impactful tool that we have as subject matter experts is our ability to ask questions effectively and listen actively. And this has to start right at the kickoff. Actually, it should start prior with scoping, but definitely at the kickoff. We want to ask questions effectively and listen actively and throughout the project. So for example, we want to ask open-ended and high-value questions. So instead of asking something like this, Sarah, does this schedule work for you? You might say, hey, Sarah, where do you foresee that you will have conflicts with these due dates or turnaround times? Okay. So that would be more of an open-ended, high-value question. Another example, Sarah, do you like these design ideas? Yes, no answer. Instead, we might ask, hey, Sarah, what types of designs have you seen that you like or don't like? Or what types of designs work in your culture or don't work? Okay, again, more high-value questions, getting more high-value responses. And our pre-mortem question is a high-value question. Sarah, what does success look like for you? Imagine you're sitting at your boss's desk 6 months from now. What do you want to be telling him or her about the success of this project? Or the success of working with your team. What went well, what didn't go well? Okay, so the pre-mortem question is also, a high-value question opportunity. And of course, we need to be good listeners. We need to take notes. We need to validate our SMEs' ideas when appropriate. And when appropriate, suggest variations. Insert, well, have you thought about, to redirect or to get the wheels churning in a different direction. So we've talked about several ideas and tools for working with SMEs, from kicking off for success to managing a subject matter expert through the process. We've talked about different characteristics and archetypes, all with the goal of ensuring that you can empathize and have gratitude for your SMEs, but also, understand who you're dealing with and make adjustments along the way so that your relationship can be a success and your project can be a success. So we're going to move to questions, and we'll invite you to ask any questions that you might have using the question tool in the GoToWebinar.
Thanks, Jolene. We'll give you all a couple of minutes to put some questions in. And just as a reminder, we are recording the webinar today, so the full recording will be sent out to everyone who registered for the webinar. So even if people had to drop off from your organization early, we'll make sure that everyone gets a copy of it. All right, one of the first questions here is there a type of SME, Jolene, that we should aspire to be?
Oh, great question. So clearly, if you are a SME, your aspiration should be a successful project. And the elements that lead to a successful project are sharing your ideas, sharing your concerns, communicating, but also being prepared. Come to meetings prepared. Review what you're sent ahead of time. So I would say let's call it the Girl Scout or Boy Scout to me. So come prepared, ready to help, and knowing that you need to communicate early and often.
Great. The second question here is, how can we engage the SME from the start in the first meeting?
Again, great question. So again, I can't stress the importance enough of that robust kickoff meeting. And at that kickoff meeting, scheduling your first meeting with the SME so that you're doing that collaboratively and getting buy-in, maybe even talking about what is going to be involved in that first meeting, sending an agenda in advance with some clear asks, maybe sending an outline of what you're going to talk about so that it can come prepared with notes. But also, I think it's important to communicate to them what's in it for them, and how important their contribution is to the project.
Great. And in the same vein, what would you do if there's an influential SME that has to enter a project mid-project, mid-flow?
Yes. Well, we talked about scope, right? And walking through the scope of work and aligning on that scope of work, which means aligning on process. So this, in my opinion, is an opportunity to address scope and maybe have a change order for process. And that change order might be to include another iteration that allows this SME to give some input and for you to gather that input and adjust the deliverable accordingly. But if you've aligned on expectations, you've aligned on process early with a project sponsor, then you can have this change of scope conversation more easily. but don't push it under the rug and deal with it later, because this type of entrance into a project will derail it. So have that conversation about scope change, process change, adding an iteration right away.
Great. And I've been tasked with hiring subject matter experts to recruit as trainers. Any tips for recruiting SMEs that will eventually be contract trainers? How do you vet this process?
Yeah, well, I would look at a job description for an instructional designer and trainer, and ensure that those are the characteristics and qualifications, competencies that you're looking for. So they'll have, depending upon the scope of that role, whether it's a classroom, it includes classroom training or not, you are going to want to find people who can really take a lot of data and condense it into, they have the ability to analyze that data and condense it into a learning activity, action-based learning activity versus an information dump, which means maybe they're good storytellers.
Great. And there's been a few questions relating to, is it better to meet in person with SMEs or over a WebEx? And then how do you overcome the challenges and barriers of having people who are remote or in different locations?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we're faced with that every day, and we're probably going to be faced with it more and more. I think that as instructional designers working with SMEs, we have to meet them where they're at. So if your SME is more comfortable meeting in person, and that's going to be the most productive venue, then you might need to consider that. If your SME is used to WebEx, we have a lot of clients that are used to WebEx, then we have to be comfortable working with SMEs that way. So again, it's really empathizing with your SMEs and getting comfortable as instructional designers working with them where they're at.
Great. And in that same vein, sometimes there can be a lot of SMEs, and it makes it challenging to get everyone together at once. Can we hold multiple kickoff meetings to drive the same alignment that you discussed?
Yes, and we have done that in the past. We have had multiple kickoff meetings. I feel like it's not as effective, to have multiple versions of the very same meeting. So often what I do instead is have a higher level kickoff for the entire group, and then see if there's a way that I can group the deliverables and then have breakout kickoffs for the SMEs involved in those different sets of deliverables, and then get into details for those that are relevant to those SMEs and those deliverables.
Great. And there's a question of, what if the AWOL SME is due to the lack of their management support?
Yes. So if you are able to escalate, I do think that is, certainly something that you have to consider. But first, I think it's important to get really creative about how you engage that AWOL SME. And in particular, being real clear what the consequences are if you don't get their input, and being very clear of the drop dead date for their input. And I think if you've communicated those things clearly, then you can feel more confident in escalating.
Great. And any tips or tricks on continuing relationships with SMEs and building those when you already have an established project?
Yes. Great question. And really, that could be a really thorny issue if the established relationship is not going so well, or it could be a fun intervention if it is going well and you just want to get it to the next level. But let's say it's a thorny relationship. And the example that I gave with the bacon, that was a thorny relationship, and the project had been going on for a while. And it was, it took cracking the shell with something that was just slightly more personal. So I think I might take that approach. Yeah.
Great. How might you approach working with an organization that has too many SMEs working on one specific initiative? Because this brings up collaborative, personalities, scheduling, continuing to agreements, timelines, all those challenges.
Yeah. Again, if you prepare for your kickoff meeting and you lay out the process and assumptions about that process, meaning, a review cycle is going, once you turn something over for review, in order to meet the deadline, this review can only take 1 week. And we need consolidated feedback from one person, not feedback from 20 different SMEs. We need a consolidator of that feedback who not only consolidates, but also clarifies any conflicting feedback. So setting those expectations up front and communicating those in the kickoff, and then at the, even if you're planning for the kickoff, to say, listen, here's a risk. You have too many SMEs, and here's what I've seen happen in the past, and based on this schedule and these assumptions, the risk is we're not going to meet this schedule. So again, it's just being very clear upfront, establishing assumptions, pointing out risks, and then ideally they have data to make the decision we need them to make, which is to eliminate some of the SMEs.
Great. And I think this is the last one. I work as a contractor, and often the client is the SME. How do I handle situations where what the client wants or that the SME wants isn't the best solution for the learner?
Yes. That's the control freak or the know-it-all or the include-it-all. And what I find that works is I have elevator pitches for what I do, right? My expertise is in adult learning theory, and I pull those out, and I talk about bite-sized chunks and spaced repetition and what happens if we don't do those things. So it's really getting confident in your expertise as an instructional designer and sharing that knowledge with your client or your subject matter expert.
Great. So I think those were all the questions that we had. So we will move toward wrapping this up for you all today. As Jolene mentioned, there is a associated guide that we have put together that talks through what that robust kickoff should look like for you guys. And we have put this up on our website, and we'll also be distributing it along with the link to the recording of the webinar to all the registrants after the session finishes today as well. But if you'd like to go to www.dashe.com and go to our resources panel, you can download it right now as well. And we hope that this serves as a really great tool for you guys for preparing for kickoff meetings and making sure that you are aligning those subject matter experts with your team to be set up for success.
Great.
And then there's a couple of exciting events coming up for Dash and Thompson here. Next week, Jolene will be speaking at the Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education meeting in Chicago. And then we are also attending the ATD conference in DC this year at the end of May, where we'll both be presenting and exhibiting. And we'd love to see any of you who happen to be at the conference to stop by our booth. And then just as a quick reminder, Dash & Thompson, we're a full-service learning and development consulting firm. I'd absolutely love to talk with all of you about your learning initiatives, and if there's anything that we can do from our end to support you. All of our contact information is there on the screen, so please feel free to reach out to me at any time. We'd love to talk with you and learn more. And that really brings us to the end of the webinar today. So like I mentioned, we will be distributing it to everybody after the call, and we are so grateful for your time today and hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.